I apologize. Reverend Lawson is also here, so we'd like to invite him up as well. So I understand that the bus for San Diego is going to be leaving around 4, so we're going to try to wrap this up at 4:45 so people can make it. All right?
So thank you all for being here for the question and answer session. I'm mindful of the time, and you all have your own bus to get on. Will you get on the bus? That's the question. I know this morning we had a lot of questions and not a whole lot of time. So I think this panel should really be devoted to your questions, answers. Of course, we have really an extraordinary panel here to discuss this topic. I think you're all very familiar. How many folks here read Raymond's book, Freedom Riders? Great. So, of course, we have Raymond Arsenault, professor at the University of Southern Florida and author of the book Freedom Riders. Ralph Fertig, professor of the School of Social Work and a Freedom Rider himself. And, of course, Reverend James Lawson, one of the organizers of the Freedom Rider movement and one of the great architects of nonviolence in the world today. So, oh, and we also have Claude Liggins, another Freedom Rider in the audience. So. Claude, would you like to join us here? And I'll moderate from the podium. I mean, yeah. So I asked that we ask the questions from the microphones in the audience so we can all hear. And let's get to it. So who wants to start us off with the first question of this really extraordinary panel?
Hi, I guess I'll start by asking, there was an amazing documentary that we just watched. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the documentary, if you were working with the documentarian, and how that all came about?
Is this on?
Yeah.
The Freedom. Most of the people you saw, the Freedom Riders, were mainly from the East Coast, and they were on the first 2 or 3 buses. And most of the Freedom Riders that you saw in the movie were from the East Coast, and mainly from the first 2 or 3 buses. I was with the California group. I left the second group to leave California. I was arrested June 25th, 1961. And I spent time at Parchman. A lot of people you saw in the film, I met up in the Parchman prison, and when they took the mattresses and they, one of the things they did, because they didn't like all I was singing, they put us in what you call a hole, which is about 6 by 6. There was like 50-something of us in that hole, and as soon as we got in there, the sweat just came down. And it reminded me during that time of the slaves that were on the boats, the ships that came from Africa, when they had them down in the gully of the belly, the ship. And it was an amazing experience. And I joined when they burnt the bus in Anderson. I was a student at LA City College, and I was coming home one night from work about 1 o'clock, and when I heard that they did that, then I wanted to join. And I was not afraid of dying. In fact, I would have been quite willing to die for the movement, and I joined and I went. and I think it's one of the great experiences I've ever had. Thank you.
Is this on?
Yeah.
It's on, yes. I should just say that what you saw in the film was just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what I wish we could have interviewed hundreds of the Freedom Riders. And of course, this is the difference between a historian and a filmmaker. I was working with the film crew. If I'd been making the film, it probably would have been 8 hours long and unwatchable, I'm sure. But I kept telling them, you just have to interview this particular Freedom Rider. It's so extraordinary, and the stories are so amazing, Claude among them. So what you saw were sort of representative figures of dozens, scores, hundreds of people who had just the most remarkable stories. So we had to make the film a kind of representation of reality rather than reality itself.
It should also be said that we wanted the support of the nation. We wanted the support of people from other parts of the country. But you have to recognize that the heart of the struggle was in the southeastern part of the country. That's where the toughness of segregation and racism abided. And that's where the violence was so unparalleled in the country as well. We still have violence in our society in different ways. We still have violence that emanates out of racism. But a part of the Freedom Ride issue was the fact that those of us who were organizing daily, I came out of the Mississippi jail and back to Nashville, and then was on the picket line for jobs for black people for the grocery stores. We had just finished the theaters. So the Freedom Ride was but one sort of interlude in our work in the movement as we saw it. This campaign was one campaign. Remember, '62, in part because of the Freedom Ride, was the Albany movement, again initiated by SNCC and young people. '63 was the Birmingham campaign that produced the March on Washington, that produced the that Kennedy then, he wasn't going to produce a civil rights bill until '64, but because of the Birmingham campaign, in which there were more than 1,000 major kinds of demonstrations around the country. '64 was the Mississippi Summer, when SNCC and the Mississippi movement invited students to come in, where they conducted voter registration, freedom rides, freedom schools rather, a whole wide variety of activities that was a part of the movement. '65 was the Selma to Montgomery March and the bill for voting rights. '66 was the Meredith March against fear in Mississippi, where James Meredith was shot just outside of Memphis. '67, '66, '67 was the Chicago Civil Rights Movement, where King agreed to move up to Chicago and all to work with a group there working on housing and schools and other things. '67, my memory is slipping here, but '67, 66 was 67 was Chicago movement. '68 was the sanitation strike in Memphis and the assassination of Martin King. '69 was a series of hospital strikes as working people who were largely black people went on strike to demand the right to have collective bargaining, their right to participate in the decisions of safety, health care, wages, and whatnot. So '68 also was the beginning of the student campus movement, which demanded that universities change their curriculum to include more black studies, women's studies, studies on the world, literature from the world, and the rest of it. That was '68. Began at Harvard, then jumped to Columbia, went all across the country. So you're talking about you're talking about an impossible experience that no one has yet really put into a comprehensible whole. And and so we come out of Mississippi, and some of us in the South were daily engaged in this struggle, organizing one campaign after the other campaign. All these campaigns that I've mentioned, I participated in. And I was in the Poor People's Campaign in Washington in '68 as well. So that I just wanted to push the notion that we're talking about a comprehensive effort, in which the Freedom Ride was a single piece and an important piece.
You can see how the Freedom Ride sort of got lost in the shuffle for a number of years with so much going on. The movement became a way of life.
Well, but there's been no, Ray, there's been no comprehensive study or book on the whole movement. Now, I love many of the books that I read,
I agree.
and I read about it, but there's been no book that really captures it at all. I've been teaching from an outline.
Would you get the microphone?
I'm teaching from an outline that I'm calling, that I want to publish sometime soon, an outline to get a comprehensive view of the civil rights movement, 1953 to 1973. And I very concretely select those 20 years of major activity. Yeah. So the sit-in campaign of 1960 has not had a major book. There have been some small, tiny books.
Recent one.
Yeah, that really haven't touched the issue at all. So that's another example.
Well, I know we probably go on to the questions, but just to follow up, in civil rights studies now, we talk about the long civil rights movement. And I can look at my syllabi over the years, and I confidently started in 1954 with the Brown decision when I taught my first class in 1974. I now start in 1909. Actually, I started in the 19th century because with the creation of the NAACP, but the farther back we go and the more we look, the more we find. And the same thing with post-1965. There was a notion things got complicated with Black Power and some of the things that Reverend Lawson just talked about. So I think traditionally we would take our students up to 1965 and then somehow the semester would run out. Now we're realizing that there's an incredible story that's taken place, as I'm sure all of you know, since 1965, which is continuing. So he's absolutely right, though. We haven't quite gotten a handle of it, but there are hundreds, maybe thousands of scholars now trying to chip away at it. So we'll hope somebody will break through in the near future.
Let's have our next question, please. Thank you.
I was always told that patience is a virtue. I just had a very quick question. First of all, I loved this documentary, and I loved the point of view in which you framed everything, and I think it was wonderful. My question is, one of the segments in the video, can you hear me okay? One of the segments in the video discussed how the university students of CORE, they had this dislike towards Dr. King because he did not participate in the Freedom Ride. Do you think now, in hindsight, looking back, that was the best decision for Dr. King not to participate for the simple fact that the CORE students were, basically incarcerated in a federal prison for 60 days, and had Dr. King gone with you on the train, on the bus, and been incarcerated, do you think that would have been the end of the civil rights movement as we know it?
I don't think so. Go ahead, Ralph.
Well, aside from any reasons that Dr. King may have had, I think it was wonderful that he did not go on that bus, because that made it clear that this was not a top-down revolution, that it came from the people themselves. And I think he strengthened that, whether it was advertent or inadvertent. He strengthened that sense of it, that you don't always need to have somebody who is recognized and loved and revered by a broad cross-section, but you yourself can take action and bring about change. I mean, this whole movement, in a sense, it started with 11 people in Washington, D.C., but in a very real sense, as the other speakers have indicated, it began with the abolitionist movement, it began with the women's movement, it began with the workers' movement, May 1st, 1887 at the Haymarket in Chicago. So it was built on a series of movements that came from the people themselves. And one of the problems with some of the other organizations is they got too involved either in personality or in structure of their organizations. And I think it was effective and wonderful the way it did work out. Now, I think there were certainly reasons why Dr. King didn't want to go on the bus. And you can't just dismiss his comment that he was on probation. He was on probation from Georgia. If he had gone on the Freedom Ride, he could have been locked up for 60 or 90 days. And we needed him out there. We needed him out where he was. Jim?
Well, I think because he didn't go, it gave a lot of credibility and put the spotlight on other people who were able to take his place. You know, you can't, you know, like if you're in the Army, which I've never been in service, but you have people that go in and you have people that join them, and the people that came after that were inspired, not by just King, but by other people of their own age, own religion, and that really sparked it. This was a people's movement, mainly a young people's movement, because they decided that they wanted to do something, and they were not afraid to do it.
Well, I think we academics and students of life and politics and movements, as we analyze and view the scenery, we do like to point up differences or divisions and whatnot and whatnot. And in many cases, I think that could be quite important. But I think that in 1960, 61, the emerging nonviolent struggle that a number of us represented was very unified at two essential points. One, we had a passion to break down and dismantle the racism and all of its concomitant parts. And secondly, we had a passion that we could best do this through direct action, not with guns, but through nonviolent direct action. And in my teaching, and I taught Martin Luther King Jr. and Southern Christian Leadership Conference, I taught workshops on nonviolence in all their meetings from 1958 to about 1965, 66. And all. I insisted that you could not force any person in the movement to do what they felt they could not do. That especially in this business of the dangers that we faced, that each one of us had to make that decision for ourselves. We were not an army with responsibility to a hierarchical order with treason being charged if we did not obey. In all of the campaigns where I participated, I insisted always that you let people make their own choices. And I have to say to you, as one of the people looking at the whole picture even back then, I was glad that Martin King did not decide to go. The house in Dr. Harris's home was divided. that he had other stuff going on. He was a major symbol and voice of the struggle. At no time has America ever had such a movement where there was a symbolic voice that was heard around the world. No time. This in itself was a phenomenon, you see. And so, as one of the people who talked to King on strategy and philosophy and whatnot, I recognized that he could not make certain decisions when certain ones of us in the movement felt he had to make the decision. In the Birmingham campaign, he made the decision when he was going to go to jail, when he was going to march and go to jail. We did not try to force him. We wanted him to have the creativity to do what he had to do on the outside, and when the moment came for him to do something, to lead a march and go to jail, then that was the moment that he had to make the decision for. On the other side of the coin, he insisted that staff people, that I couldn't go to jail in Birmingham because I needed to work in the continued organization and mobilization and all. So I'm hoping for you to understand a movement that is a social organism that is emerging. We don't have full structure in place. We don't have a full philosophy in place. We don't have a full notion of what we're up against in place. But we are rather driven by the sense that we can do something in our own time and that we should do it.
Let me just say before we move on to the next question very briefly that this was the most difficult thing to deal with in the entire film. We had contradictory testimony, many different opinions. People who were in the same room at the same time had different memories. And I think you can see the difference between film and when you have a larger format like a longer book. I could spend much more time trying to lay out the possibilities, the different scenarios. In the film, they really had to adopt almost one narrative, and almost impossible to do justice to the complexity of all the feelings about whether Dr. King should have gone on the bus or not. So I think Stanley Nelson made a heroic attempt to deal with a very difficult, controversial subject, but he only had a few seconds to do it. But it's by no means the last word on this, as Reverend Lawson just suggested.
My question actually, I really enjoyed the documentary. It was awesome and was very informative, and it just shed a light on a topic that has meant so much to so many of us, and I think new information to some who've never heard it. But my question actually has to do with something that Dr. Lawson said this morning, which has to do with the number of African Americans that are incarcerated versus the number who are pursuing education, that the numbers have reversed, and there are more in jail than there are pursuing education. And when you look at a documentary like this and what was happening in the 60s, I wonder myself, as a mother of a young African-American male, how it is that we can inspire our children and our community to look for something greater and to pursue something more than what's been happening, and what are the factors that maybe contribute to them being more in prison and less in higher education or in education. And I thank you for taking my question.
I think one of the things that is missing, that in my generation, we did a lot of things to change a lot of things. But I think that we didn't teach the history to our kids like we should have. And I think it not only should be taught in the schools, but I think really they should be taught in the church. And the churches should have classes on black history. But the civil rights movement was not just about blacks being participating. I mean, about almost 50% of the participants in the Freedom Riders were white. And even the civil rights movement in Mississippi, and we had a big civil rights movement here in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of white people in it. And I was involved heavily here, and I was arrested a few times here in Los Angeles. But I think we need to start teaching them early to develop this pride. You know, they had these songs out like James Brown. You know, he came up with the song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and Proud. You know, we need to get back to saying something like that. And they had a lot of music that inspired us to feel good about being black and proud. So I think, you know, that's what we should do. And you should ask us to speak to you, too, while we're alive, because we're pretty up there. You know, it won't be something you just read about, you know, because, the youngest person that was arrested on the Freedom Ride was 13. And I think the oldest person was in their 40s. 61. No. 61, okay. Okay, and I'm 70, so, you know, I don't know how long I have to live, so you better get me while you can, you know.
Well, I think the reason for this is rooted in the exploitative nature of our society. I spoke this morning, I denigrated the military culture, but it goes beyond the military. And in fact, the military culture is more egalitarian than much of the rest of our society. But it's the exploitation that has been the key to the development of America. It was the exploitation of the American Indians and the ripping away of their lands and their property that characterized the founding of this nation. And it's been an exploitation and of people who were ripped from their homeland and brought here in chains to serve as slaves. And it was the exploitation of people in what was then Mexico and ripping it away, 1/3 of the land mass of Mexico, to create our western boundaries. And this is done in the name of manifest destiny. You studied this in your classes, the notion that the Europeans have the right to divest America of its original nature and to impose upon all of America a point of view and an economy that relies upon the exploitation of others. And it's what Jim sometimes calls, Dr. Lawson sometimes calls, polite Jim Crow. We've hidden from the television cameras the racial nature of it, but it appears in the jailhouses of America, and it appears in the schools of America and in the healthcare programs. As I mentioned this morning, take any dimension of the social work in which you're going to become engaged, whether it's healthcare or schools or mental health. Take a look at where our money is going. It's going not to make this a richer nation in the sense of the development of people and the education and the anti-poverty efforts and the safety net, all of which is being shredded. Shredded for what? For more war, for more exploitation of the rest of the world. We have to really get ahead of that. The reason we've had all these people's movements is because people are exploited and they have to speak out and react. There's a reason for the movements and the heritage of which we're proud. And the reason for that heritage and for these movements continues, it persists. In many ways, we're worse off today than we were 20, 30 years ago.
Let's move to our next question in the back, but before we go there, I just want everyone to know that's 3:40, so if you're on the 3:45 bus, now might be a nice time to make that bus. So, the young lady in the back.
I was wondering if you have received any formal reparations, either monetary or some kind of apology by any of the government, state, federal officials that were antagonists toward the movement, and if not, what has been your payback from the injustices you personally received as a result of participating in the movement?
Not only was there no payback or compensation, there wasn't a single pardon. These were people who were arrested. It was false arrest. What were they charged with? It was mad. They were upholding a law, a ruling, 2 Supreme Court decisions. It was wrongful arrest, wrongful imprisonment. They should be exonerated, not just pardoned. Nothing. The current governor of Mississippi has not apologized one whit. Instead, has tried to steal the heritage, the legacy of the movement.
I like to say I got paid. I was in Mississippi. I had just gotten out of Parchman prison, and we were staying over at this elderly couple's house, and I was walking to the Corps office, which was about 3 or 4 blocks, and this middle-aged black lady came up to me and gave me a hug, and she was thanking me, and in the meantime she was holding my hand, and when she left, I realized she had left $3 in my hand, and so that was my pay.
We have 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up this session. So let's hear from the front.
Okay. It did seem like Governor Patterson was in cooperative in protecting the Freedom Riders. So how did the filmmakers get him to interview for the film, and does he have a different perspective on the movement now?
Perhaps I could begin answering that. Those of you who've seen the great documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which came out in 1986, they interviewed Governor Patterson in 1985, and if you see the footage there, he was totally non-contrite. There was not a sense of any regret. He didn't say he lied. He didn't apologize. And I think that's why he agreed to do this. I think he felt he's nearing 90 now. He appears to be healthy and may live forever, it seems. But which seems to be a trend in the sort of Southern demagogue tradition. They seem to live on forever. But there's more footage than you saw in the film, and he actually, at one point, comes very close to an apology. They decided not to put it in the film, but he comes very close to saying, "No, I really feel sorry for what I did." He doesn't say that, of course, in the footage that you saw, but he's much softer and much more human. And to this point, I don't believe he has seen the film. And we're wondering if he may be there in Chicago when all the Freedom Riders are there on the Oprah show. She would like to have some inclusion of people on the other side, and particularly those who've had at least some level of reconciliation or change. And I'm not sure where you'd put him in that category, but he, of course, was superseded by George Wallace, and so he has a sense that even though he was an extreme segregationist for the time, there were even more extreme segregationists, and so there's a kind of a pantheon of villains that you can find in this segment of Southern history, and we were surprised, I should say. I know his niece actually, and she always kept telling me, he'll talk to you, and he did, but and we were surprised how forthcoming he was.
We should not see this issue of the unrepentant politician or the issue of our leadership today that is not able to say we're sorry for the misdeeds of the society. I mean, we are fighting 2 wars that are wrong wars, bad wars, evil wars. We have no business fighting them. We're killing mostly women and children. We ought not to be in Iraq or in Afghanistan. We should not be putting all of our heat against North Korea and Iran and pretending that they are the dangers. The United States is the only nation that has dropped nuclear weapons on cities. We justify it. I've read some of the literature from way, way back about the dropping of those bombs. I'm not sure that that we can justify the use of those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're still doing things that we're unrepentant for, and that makes our work all the more urgent in the 21st century. I hate to tell you this as social workers, but it makes your work all the more urgent, that we somehow have in the business help to sow the kind of self-consciousness and awareness that will help our public leaders and the leaders of our public and private institutions to be able to discern the difference between right and wrong. It's not enough to say that my intentions were good. The behavior, the practice must also reflect the good, the loving, the just, the true. And this is a monumental task for our country, because we, for 400 years, have never really repented of taking the land from around 13, 15 million indigenous people. That's how many were here. And when I was in high school, I learned that there were only a few thousand indigenous people here, and the land was all empty and whatnot. Well, I've learned other than that. We haven't done anything about that. We have not repented for 250 years of slavery. We have not repented for Jim Crow law of another 135 years. We're not repenting today for throwing our young people in jails, because it's mostly the young who are being thrown in jails. The young, the poor, the black, the brown are the people being thrown in the jails. Very often for misconduct that their white counterparts in the same city are not thrown in jail for. And there is a direct path between, in the 60s, our trying to dismantle Jim Crow law, and then the law and order politicians and the privatization of jails, then moving us to becoming a jail colony for millions of people, in millions of our own citizens, and all. So I simply want to say, this is a current issue that we have to face, that the Freedom Ride responded to in part, but we have not yet resolved.
For our final question of the day.
Reverend Lawson, you may have just addressed part of this question, but I'll ask it anyways. From your unique perspectives, what do you see as the most pressing civil rights issue today? And what role do you think direct nonviolent action could play in working towards gaining those rights?
I think one of the most pressing issues is our court system, both civil and criminal. If you're an average person and you go to court, if you don't have a lawyer, and a good lawyer, not just a lawyer, but if you don't have the money for a good lawyer, your case is almost lost from the very beginning. And I realize that maybe most of the people here will probably end up being social workers, but wherever you are in life, whether you're a social worker, whether you're an attorney, we need to work on trying to change the justice system, because it is bad. And I don't really see how the judges and the lawyers, because there's no justice. One time I was in court of a civil case that I had filed, and I was talking with this middle-aged white man, I think it was a lawyer, and he was quite angry, and he said, these judges know that these lawyers are lying, and they just let them get away with everything. And no insult to lawyers, but I can tell you one thing, the court system is really messed up.
I'd just like to offer a possible answer to your question. A couple of weeks ago, I reviewed a rather remarkable new book by Eugene Robinson. He's often he's a Pulitzer Prize winning African American journalist for the Washington Post. He did a book called Disintegration, where he talks about the splintering of black America. Part of the book is fairly hopeful, and it points out that the black middle class is larger than it's ever been. But that's the good news, perhaps. The bad news is he talks about W.E.B. Du Bois saying that the issue of the 20th century was race, but he predicts that the big issue of the 21st century is going to be what he calls the abandoned, the people that many of you will have to deal with as social workers. That there's a whole segment, large segment of American society, maybe not just in the United States, but he's focusing on the United States, of people who are literally abandoned by the social network of the society, and that he predicts that if we don't address this, it's going to come back to haunt all of us, not only in a moral sense, the kind of moral bankruptcy of abandoning these people, but in a realistic, pragmatic sense that our society is going to unravel if we don't pay attention to the group that he called the abandoned. So I think that is something is near the top of the list.
Well, I would tend to agree with that. I think the problem right now is fundamentally economic. The enormous disparities which are reflected to a terrifying extent in ethnic concentration. That is, there are ethnic groups that are subordinated. But they're subordinated, I think, largely in the organization of our economy, the incredible concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer people and in corporate entities in which they participate, and in the enormous accumulation of power in the hands of fewer and fewer people, political, economic, social power. And abandonment's a good term, and Eugene Robinson's a good writer. And it is an abandonment of those people who are the major focus of social workers. It is we who reach out to the abandoned. And we must continue to do so, because there are successive movements which must emerge from the people that you will serve. You've got to help them gain that sense of empowerment and entitlement and of themselves to create the next revolution in America.
Well, I would agree with all that has been said about this issue. The spark for a social movement does come from a combination of organizing, mobilizing, acting, agitation, protest. And just when that will occur here in the United States, again, I do not know. There are lots and lots and lots of people who are working on that. I want to say to you as social workers that if history starts churning in our society, and you see it and feel it and recognize with passion that it's on the right side of history and not the wrong side of history, don't be a spectator. Get in it in whatever way you can and join it and make it happen. The years of the civil rights movement, in my judgment, were some of the finest years that I have ever known. I never expect to reiterate them anywhere. They were years of great personal friendship, of personal growth, of discovering that the heart is almost of infinite size for caring and loving and enjoying life, and for compassion, that there are really no limits on the human race except maybe the limits we allow our society and ourselves to impose upon the potential. The human race has infinite potential. The past is not the best years. The future years are the best years to come. And I simply say to you that if given the opportunity to get engaged in a dynamic, intensified fashion that, yes, can be threatening, but at the same moment can be risky, but at the same moment, through the threat and through the risk, you will be surprised and astonished at how much humanity, human affections can fill your life and your soul.
You know, as I look back on the civil rights movement and being a Freedom Rider, it was some of the most exciting days of my life because I met friends. We meet them in jail. And you know, one of the things is you really don't know what freedom is until you've lost it. And we lost our freedom, but we knew what we wanted, and we made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of things that we have to do. And I hope that some of the people out here, in fact, I hope all of the people out here, when the time comes for you to speak out and speak up about something, you will have the courage to do it. And you should make up your mind now what you, of your convictions, and keep that in mind, because sooner or later you're going to have to make a decision whether or not you want to, you'll have the courage to do it. You know, we used to sing a song that says, "Which side are you on, boy?" You know, I guess that could apply to girls too. But you're going to either stand for what's right and speak out about it, or you're going to let it slip by and pass you up. And the world's going to be a worse place than what it is now. I thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Our panel is here if you want to meet anyone on the panel or ask more questions. Also, a very special thank you to Dr. Cherry Short. She made all this possible. Really extraordinary amount of hard work. So thank you, Cherry. And we'll see you next year at All School Day. Take care.